Okay, so we are still on Unit 2, but now we're going to talk about ancient Egypt, and I will do the first few images that we are going to look at in ancient Egypt. And I know everybody has some idea of ancient Egyptian artwork, very bizarre looking poses of the body, that composite profile that we've talked about, and I think that's where the main association with that composite profile comes from. I think it's important to note that it's ancient Egypt is extremely close to the Fertile Crescent, and they're going to share ideas and traits with Mesopotamia, which we just looked at. So, and you can see here that when historians have compared ancient Egyptian art to like Greek or Renaissance, it's Egyptian art looks very archaic because the Greek and Renaissance art is so naturalistic and almost looks photographic in some instances. So here are your terms for ancient Egypt, and we just talked about the step pyramid process, which is the white ziggurat, and we'll go over these as we go through the images. So just to get a little bit of an idea where we're looking at, you've got Sumer and the Akkadian Empire, which we just talked about, and then we've got Egypt over here. So it probably was probably easy for them to trade, and we talked about how the Mesopotamians traded with a lot of different places, so I'm sure that that's why their connection you see there, because these people are traveling to and from each location, and they see what artistically what the other civilization is doing, so they follow suit. This is just a timeline so you can see how many different periods there are in ancient Egyptian artwork. You have the prehistoric period, and we think prehistoric, and we think before documentation. Then we have the archaic period, and there's an archaic period in the Greek, ancient Greek period as well, and it's kind of bizarre the reason it's called archaic, but we'll talk about that. The Old Kingdom, this is when the Pyramid Age, when the pyramids at Giza were being erected. Then we have the first intermediate period, the Middle Kingdom, the second intermediate kingdom, and the New Period. The Gift of the Nile. So they call Egypt the Gift of the Nile, and prior to the 1970s, the Nile would kind of overflow each year. And it would leave this really rich slit that made the valley very fertile, which is why you have all these civilizations kind of landing by rivers for that reason. So first we're going to start with the pre-dynastic period. We're looking at 5000 to 2950 BCE. This was a transition period, and you're going to see with, I think the first image that we look at, it's basically about the unification of Egypt, and because they were very separated, so they had North and South Egypt, and they had different rulers, and this is the period where they all kind of come together. So I just talked about them becoming a consolidated state, and the artwork is going to look a lot like Mesopotamian artwork from this time period, I think, and you can see why. Composite profile, the eyeliner like we saw in Mesopotamia and the votive figures. So an important thing to talk about is the god kings. So we talked about this in Mesopotamia too, where they truly believed that their rulers had a lifeline or a direct link to their god. So basically the ruler was like a set-in for the god. So this, I think these are important for you to see. So this, and I talked about how in the prehistoric period, that Egypt was separated into upper and lower, and they had two recognizable crowns. So you had the upper crown and then the lower crown, and then this is after they were unified. So they took both of those images and put them together. I I think these are some important symbols for you to be familiar with. I'm pretty sure you've probably seen all of these. Horus is a real important god to them. So we've talked a lot about convections in art, and I hope that you're starting to understand this term, and I'm hoping that you would be able to recognize what a convection would be. So it's a way of establishing something in a time period. So whether that be the artist's choice or something that's in their culture that is reoccurring in their artwork. So in Egyptian artwork, the composite profile, that would be an example of a convection. Mesopotamia, the registers would be a convection. The composite profile would be a convection. Even the material they used could have been a convection, like the lapis lazuli that we saw that was mined in Afghanistan in the Standard of Ur. That would have been another convection, because you see that lapis show up a lot in Mesopotamian artwork, and not so much in like any other artwork that was being produced at this time. So it's kind of like the one thing that made their artwork stand out opposed to other civilizations' artwork, and it'll become more like predominant the more we go along in the periods. So this is your first image that you need to know in ancient Egypt, and this is from the early dynastic period. This is the palette of King Narmer, and King Narmer is associated with unifying both North and South Egypt. And I think that just looking at this initially, the reason it's called a palette is this is actually like a makeup palette. So if you see this area here where the two lions with elongated necks like kind of make a recessed circle, it's where they would have kept the eye makeup that they put on, that they used for, like, basically it's like sunglasses. But I was talking about makeup, and this would have been made out of coal, actually, to draw, like, it's like, if you think of it, it's like really heavy eyeliner. I want to talk about, this is a low relief image. So we talked about low and high relief when we looked at the Code of Hammurabi, and you can see that it's not real far carved down, so that's why it's a low relief image. There's a lot of iconography in this image, and that's a word that you are going to hear a lot. And basically iconography means the visual images and symbols that are used in a work. So we've got a lot of symbols happening here. So I want to break this image down, and I think it's easier to look at if we kind of look at a sketch of it. So I believe this is the front. Oops. This is the front of the Narmer palette, and these heads up here, which you see on both sides, are supposed to represent the cow goddess Hathor. So this is the cow goddess, and this right here in the middle is the cuneiform, or actually hieroglyphic, their writing, and it actually says Narmer. He wears the crown on this side of Upper Egypt, and this guy right here is a sandal bearer, and he has a jar that he's carrying to sanctify the king. The bird up here is another one of the a representation of the gods, and he's standing on this papyrus blossom. And okay, so this is the falcon god Horus, and these papyrus blossoms are like really important to their culture because they would unroll them and use that to write on. So, and then you can see he's killing or slaying like the king from Upper Egypt. And this is also a Mayan tradition where the king or general of the opposing party who is being defeated would be brought to the king, whether he's dead or not already, to do some type of slain. So the king actually slays him, whether he's dead or not. It's kind of like just like a ritual thing. And this down here are basically the enemies being trampled. And I think it's important to note that these are in registers. So Standard of registers, Palette of Narmer registers. So that's what's going on the front. And this is the back. So we have the same thing going on at the top. The cow goddess and Narmer's name in hieroglyphics. And then this section here is, you see King Narmer here, and he's got the unified crown on, and they're carrying the standards into battle. This is him carrying his army carrying the standards into battle, and here's all their enemies that have been beheaded. And then down here, this is a lion that's neck has been elongated. It's not a giraffe, and there are two people here that are kind of controlling the lion. So it's like Narmer took control of Lower Egypt. And then down here at the bottom, the bull, which is it's a very important figure to the Egyptians. And it's basically representing like forced unification. So let's look at this in comparison to the Standard of So we can see like the registers. Hierarchical scale is something else because he's much larger in both sides because he's the most important. And gods, of course, are always at the top. I think you could really, draw a lot of comparisons, especially like on the war side of the Standard of how the king's so much larger, and there's definite documentation of how violent the battle was.